Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Housing and Communities Committee. Before we get to the business on the agenda, I don't know how many of you attended the Securing the Future Awards last night. It was an excellent evening, and there were some standout performances by members of teams within Housing and Communities. I would just like to make a particular mention of the two Gold Award winners, which were the Home First team and also the Bridging the Gap. Bridging the Gap do work with minority, ethnic, elderly people to ensure that they have fair access to services. And as we've heard at this committee before, Home First have done some tremendous work in terms of rapid rehousing and getting the costs of our temporary accommodation down, better outcomes for people made homeless. We also had a couple of Silver Award winners for the rent restructuring project, which was involved close involvement of tenants and working in partnership with them, and also the estate-based initiatives, which all of you, if not, or in fact some of you, if not all of you, will have been involved in your own patches. So congratulations to all those teams. And not to forget the participatory budgeting team who won the Provost's Award on the night. So it was a really good evening, and if you didn't manage to be there, then you certainly missed out. In terms of item 1 on our agenda today, I have received notification of apologies from Councillor Bailey, with Councillor McDade taking his place as a substitute. Are there any other apologies or substitutions? No? Good. Can I have your approval of the minute of the meeting of the Housing and Communities Committee of the 28th of March and for me to sign them? Is that agreed? Approved. Thank you. And are there any declarations of interests from elected members with regard to any items on the agenda? Okay. For members who have not attended this committee before, it is our established custom and practice to vary the agenda to take the private items at the start of the agenda, these being the Police Scotland and Fire and Rescue Service operational updates, which enables those colleagues to return to operations at an earlier opportunity. On moving back into the public agenda, we would continue with items 5.1 and 5.2 before hopping back to item 4 and then working our way through the rest of the agenda. Can I have your agreement to that? Thank you very much. Can I therefore ask that members of the public and the press leave? We will hopefully be back before 10 o'clock, so we won't keep you waiting too long. Before 11 o'clock even, yeah, rather than so. I'll just hop into my TARDIS. You know, so. Item 5.1 is the quarterly performance report from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, covering the period from the 1st of January to the 31st of March. The performance summary shows that 9 of the 12 indicators are on target or ahead of target, with accidental dwelling fires and accidental dwelling fire casualties both below target. 2 accidental dwelling fire casualties in the quarter being the lowest number for 4 years, and there were no accidental dwelling fire fatalities. There were no fatalities either in non-domestic building fires and no non-fatal casualties in non-domestic building fires in the 4th quarter. Road traffic collision incidents are above target, as are non-fatal road traffic collision casualties. In response to these figures, the Road Safety Partnership is being re-established, and this multi-agency group is conducting a review to inform the local road safety plan. Can I ask Local Senior Officer Gordon Pride to speak to the report, and then we'll have questions. Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you very much, Convener. Really, before I ask the members to note, scrutinise and question the contents of this report, There's a couple of highlights I'd like to identify, some of which have already been mentioned by the convener. If I could ask you to move to page 20. And again, it's just to identify the headline indicators on this page. There are 12 headline indicators, 9 of which are showing a positive response, 3 of which are showing an upward trend. One of those is deliberate secondary fires, and I'll touch on that in a bit more detail, but they were from specific periods, and looking at Q4, it seems a positive picture. Moving forward onto page 22 to look at accidental dwelling fires. As identified by the convener, there have been no fatal fire casualties and 2 casualties. Looking at the correct page would help me here, thank you. Looking at the number overall for the year to date, we're roughly 30% below the 3-year average, and for Q1 we're again below the 3-year average, so good positive responses there. And again, looking at the fatalities and casualties, for the year to date there have been no fatal fire casualties and no fatal fire fatalities and 15 casualties within the period, which again is a fairly positive response, but we will continue to drive these numbers down as low as we can through our prevention work. Moving through to page 24 and 25, looking at non-domestic building fires and casualties from them. Again, a very positive picture on casualties and a positive picture on the longer term year-to-date number of fires in non-domestic buildings. For this Q4, we've been slightly above the 3-year average. We've had 6 fires in one location, which I'll touch on in the deliberate fires, which has brought us above that level slightly. But in general, it's a reasonable picture, and we're working to go forward. There were 19 non-domestic building fires in the period, 16 were relatively minor. There were 3 that were more significant. 2 were whole building fires based in the Braco Castle area and the Rattray area, and the 3rd one was in the Ochterarder area in an old church that I believe is now it's a council building that was under renovation work, where they were doing hot work on the roof. But our staff will continue to do audits both prior to these incidents as part of our audit regime, and also post-fire audits for any incident that we feel where learnings can be taken forward. Moving on to page 26, road traffic collisions. This is probably our area of greatest concern, as the convener has mentioned, we are looking to improve the multi-agency partnership working, and we will look to try and tackle this in a collegiate manner going forward. Moving on again to page 28, our UFAS. There's a slight reduction in the quarter and a reduction in the year to the 3-year average. Looking at our whole false alarms, we're running at roughly 4% of these false alarms are malicious, but we will continue to drive not only, or work to drive as many of these false alarms down as possible, especially the unwanted fire alarm signals and malicious calls. Looking at the breakdown for this quarter, they are on the sheet where the majority, or 30 of the UFAS calls, have been in retail offices and residential nursing homes, nursing homes and sheltered housing continue to be areas where we regularly attend. And that continues through the annual picture, where our top areas of activity around places of education, care homes, hotels and sheltered housing. But we've got a number of mechanisms in place where we are trying to support companies drive these as low as possible. Moving on to deliberate fires, as we identified here, we've had 10 in Q4, which is above the 3-year average, but 6 of these were at the same premise, and we've done significant work round with there, and we are hoping to have resolved that issue. However, this morning, just before we came here, there was another fire at that premise, so we'll find out if it was linked to the same issues or if it's a different issue in its entirety. Looking at the deliberate secondary fires, they were one of our headline indicators at the start. We can see for Q4, we've a significant reduction on the 3-year average and a fairly strong picture at this point. Where we have had through the years in Q1 and Q3, we've had specific areas where there have been some spikes in activity. A lot of this has been tackled through partnership working with police, with council and with other community members, just to identify what the causes have been and try and tackle these through education and prevention work. Moving forward to Appendix 1, We've brought a flavour and some of the narratives around some of the prevention and engagement work we're doing. Looking at the second one down, the 455 children trained with hands-on CPR at the Breedalbane Community Campus. The prevention, we're going to speak about transformation later on during this meeting, but a lot of our prevention work we're looking to broaden from not just the fire safety element, the antisocial behaviour element, but see where we can add value. And there are a number of these sessions that have been run, and if we can get the community more willing to get hands-on to casualties, the communities will be far more resilient with dealing with cardiac arrests, and especially in the out-of-hospital areas. Then the final one is Appendix 2. We spoke about it, I think, in the closed session at the last meeting, but there's some details on the Scrutiny and fire that happened in February, I think it was. I'll give you a small flavour of some of the activity and a small narrative to how that fire came about. So really that's a quick summary of what the report covers, and if there's any questions on either the report or any other elements, I'd be happy to take them.
Thanks very much for that, Gordon. I've got Councillor Shires has indicated she'd like to ask a question. If anyone else just puts up their hand.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Mr. Pride. First, I've got 2 points. Firstly, about the incident at Perth Airport. I work there, and I was really impressed at the way that both the Fire and Rescue Service and the police officers that were on duty did. I mean, it talks in the report about business continuity. There are a lot of businesses based there, and the minimal disruption, considering where the fire happened, was quite noticeable. So thank you very much for that. And my second question, well, my first question, was about the road traffic collision incidents. I think right between the A85 running to Creef right through to the A93 up to the Spittal of Glenshee, we're aware of incidents that have happened on those roads. And I just wondered if there's any way of breaking down the type of vehicles that are involved in these collisions, because it may be that our perception is incorrect, but there's perception that a lot of these involve motorbikes, which is something that is of great concern to the local communities right along that A85 through to the A93 stretch. So whether there's any opportunity for further detail there. And I noted that you talked about cross-organisation working to try and reduce the number of road traffic collisions. I wondered if that kind of information might be helpful also.
Certainly, thank you very much, and for the Scrutiny and we'll pass on your thanks to the crews that were there. All of these incidents rely on the multi-agency approach with ourselves, police and other agencies to deal with them, and it's important we do work training. We do deliver very good services through partnerships. Looking at the RTC breakdown, we tend not to hold those stats, but those stats are held within the partnership, and we will work together in a partnership to make sure we identify what the best people to target through the educational, the best people to work with our police partners in targeting the prevention through enforcement, and making sure we have all the information we need to tackle that message and get that message right. And I'll be more than happy, we're speaking to the convener in the next few days to look at how we are taking the road safety partnership work forward, and we'll be happy to bring a breakdown of a report either to the next meeting or the next appropriate meeting once we have that partnership up and running fully. Really, does that cover everything? Excellent, thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I've got Councillor Tom McEwen next.
Thank you. About probably our first meeting, the fire, you mentioned that there was a safety video around people living in caravans, fire safety video, and that was actually getting used to help with the influx of seasonal workers into the Perthshire. But also know that there's a big growth in Perthshire of actual permanent caravan sites, where people are now choosing in retirement to purchase a caravan and actually live there permanently. Do you have information on the inspections that the fire service has done on these sites and what the outcomes of any of these inspections have been?
I don't have the number of inspections that we've had at those sites, but there are inspections carried out. There are specific legislation that are required for caravan sites, and that's to do with the firefighting provision on site, and it's to do in the spacing between premises and caravans. There is continuing to be significant work done with migrant sites, and we're continuing to do that educational enforcement work. But if you wish, I could get a breakdown of what the inspection and the community engagement work has been down these sites and get that report back to you if you wish.
Yeah, I think it's something the committee itself would maybe even like, convener.
I think certainly if the fire service are able to provide the information, we can either circulate it to all members, or if it's the sort of thing that might merit being in a formal report, then we can consider that. Yeah. Do you have any supplementaries, Councillor McEwen? No. Councillor Gray.
Thank you for the report. Generally encouraging report. Of course, the headline indicators are H17 and HI9. I noticed this quarter is relatively low relative to the other quarters. This would suggest there are more such incidents in summertime. Last year happened to be a particularly busy year for visitors, and many tourists came over from Europe, etc. Last year. Is there any national trend suggesting that the summertime did involve more tourists perhaps, and was it a national trend of an increase over last summer?
So I don't have the national figures to date with me, I'm afraid, but again, I can bring these forward. But there are specific areas where there are areas of tourism, especially tourists who are used to driving on the other sides of roads, have brought some challenges historically. People who are driving on roads they're unfamiliar with bring added challenges, so there are some issues with that. But I can bring the stats to a future committee, or I can supply the stats looking at the national picture if you wish.
It does strike me that, you know, perhaps if we are inviting tourists en masse, which we do, and we're happy to see them, we perhaps need to up our safety measures in consideration of people, generally speaking, driving on the other side of the road.
What I can ensure is we'll make sure through the Road Safety Partnership, through the multi-agency approach, we'll analyse all the information, we'll analyse that, we'll make sure we identify all the trends, we'll make sure we identify where all the concerns are, and also do some of that horizon scanning to work out where the potential risks will be, and from there we'll use our resources in a targeted manner to tackle the greatest risk and make the greatest difference we can.
And again, I think if and when there are serious accidents on our roads network, each of those incidents is reviewed. I think if there was an identifiable trend that it involved specific locations and drivers from overseas, then we'd want to look at what additional safety measures could be taken to tackle that. I've got Councillor Chris Ahern next.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking at the unwanted fire alarm signals, and the 78% of false alarms were down to equipment failure. Is there any common faults across the equipment failures? Is it down to a lack of maintenance, age of equipment? And is there anything that can be done to sort of look at why we're getting a large increase in equipment failures?
A lot of the equipment failures are down to probably poor maintenance. It will be things like not getting cleaned out properly, not getting maintained, not getting replaced. But there's a significant cost in doing a lot of those replacements. But what we do for every time we attend one of these unwanted fire alarm signals, we have a stage 1 response. So our frontline appliances will engage with the owner and occupier of the premise to see what the cause has been, to see if we can put any remedial actions in place, see if we can offer any advice, and that should stop the repeat nature of these calls. If the premise has a repeat issue, we have another set of thresholds, so at 5, 10, at 5 over a 3-month period, at 10 over a 6-month period, and at 20 over a 9-month period, we've got different levels of engagements. So the next stage will be a level 2, where we'll get one of our fire safety enforcement team to start engaging, and then we'll get more and more detailed in support. But in general, when we engage with companies, their loss is significant when they are evacuating their whole premise. So they are keen to work with us and keen to try and reduce these as much as possible. So in general, there is a very positive uptake for the message, and we will continue to work with and educate sort of buildings and owners of buildings within the area.
Thanks. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Heron's actually asked one of the questions I had, but in the same area, I was curious to know whether or not the false alarms through equipment failure were from particular types of premises or whether they're just varied. And if I may have a second question to ask about the performance highlights, there's a section at 8% of incidents that are incomplete. I'm not quite sure what that means, so maybe if you could explain that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Can you just clarify what your final question was relating to, Councillor McCall?
It's on page 21 of our papers, the performance highlights graph. There's a section of 8% of incidents are classified as incomplete. And I'm not sure what that means.
What we have, if I could touch the second part first, what we have is a UK-wide recording system. It's called the IRS Incident Recording System, and that is run by the UK government. There have been some challenges because of the makeup of it, because there needs to be some investment in it. So there are some challenges sometimes getting our information onto that database. And there are also some challenges, especially with our RDS staff, in completing the paperwork we ask them to do in time for the running of these reports. So these are reports where we haven't been able to quality assure the reports in time to run the data for this report. So they are the ones that haven't had that final quality assurance done to allow us to include them in the report. But we'll continue to ensure we process these, get the quality assurance in place, so they are on the long-term trends coming forward as well. Moving on to the types of indicators, what we're looking to do is work with the employers that have, we've got a number of different mechanisms where we engage with employers, with buildings where we have the false alarms. One of them was the thresholds that we've spoken about. The other ones is looking at how we can work with employers to change detection heads and reduce the numbers that way, and that will allow us to reduce our mobilising. So a lot of the false alarms are from premises like schools, care homes, where there are a large number of heads in buildings. So that gives us that high contact rate. But where we can identify if the head's either misplaced or if it's the wrong type of detection system, what we'll try to do is work with the owner or occupier of the building to get that replaced or moved, and that should then bring these numbers down a bit further.
Does that answer all your questions, Councillor McCall? Good, thank you. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. Just 2 points, actually, if I may. Page 25 of our report, under performance management, it mentions this is to do with non-domestic fires. It said there were 19 fires in non-domestic buildings during the quarter, which were minor. It doesn't mention anything about the other 3.
The other ones we identified, they were, one was in the Braco Castle area, and that was a whole building fire. One was in the Rattray area, and that again was a whole building fire. And then the third one was in Auchterarder, and that was a conversion to an old church that is a council building, I believe, and that was maintenance on that roof. So they were the 3 incidents. They were the more severe ones. The rest were smaller.
Supplementary, if I may. This is to do with operational preparedness. We touched on God forbid, possibility of terrorism. I'm just wondering, do we have the protocols in place to deploy firefighters quickly? I'm thinking in the back of my mind the incident in Manchester where firefighters were left standing and couldn't deploy. Do we have that protocol in place to move men in quickly?
What we have, obviously, all fire and rescue services through Scotland have studied the Grenfell report. We've studied the incident itself. I was at a meeting recently from the senior leadership team in it was in Forfar, and that was one of the questions that our fire board challenged to our response and resilience director, and he was able to give them the reassurance that we have the structures in place. We have reviewed our structures. We will continue to review our structures to make sure they're fit for purpose. We have undertaken national exercises, the recent one being Border Reaver, about a marauding firearms response. So we've tested our response. We have had the national debrief from that, and we're taking the learnings from that national debrief, feeding them back into our systems and ensuring we work well. As part of the ensure we have a good partnership response, we have a multi-agency testing and exercising team, SMART2, and they are based in our headquarters in Cambuslang, and they continually drive these testings and linking the multi-agency response to make sure it's fit for purpose going forward. So I'd be comfortable giving you that reassurance that we have a service that would be able to respond in an appropriate manner.
Thanks very much for that. Are there any further questions? Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the road safety side of things and the road traffic collisions, etc. In the last couple of weeks, I personally have come across a couple of incidents, one where a driver turned right onto the wrong carriageway in the A9, realised his error, stopped and hopefully sorted it out. And another where the road markings on the entry to the A90 were non-existent pretty much. I just wondered if it would be possible going forward to get any information on collisions and accidents that occurred at junctions onto trunk roads. And in particular, I wonder if this would be an area where the Road Safety Partnership would look to perhaps improve road markings and road signage where appropriate.
Again, looking at the Road Safety Partnership itself, I don't have the details, and they're still very much in their formative stages to get them back up to where they used to be running. What they will be doing is using all the data from police colleagues, from council colleagues, and from other areas, and they'll make sure they identify whatever the trend is, whatever the cause is. Each road traffic accident will be investigated, or significant accident will be investigated by partners, and that will allow us to identify what the causes have been. If there's been anything, any remedial steps that can be put in place, we'll look to see, as again through a partnership, how we can best implement improvements. From the stats themselves, we don't record through the Fire and Rescue Service the detail, that sort of defined detail, but certainly through Stats 19 and through the local authority recording systems, I'm sure that information will be available. So the partnership will have all that information to take forward.
Thanks very much for that, Gordon. I assume that we've passed the details of the A9 incident onto our roads team, but the Director would like to comment as well, Eric.
Okay, thank you very much, Convener. Councillor Drysdale, it would be helpful to know exactly where those road markings are in terms of the A90 and the A9. There are, sort of occasionally, sort of discussions between ourselves and, sort of Transport Scotland about who owns the junction. So it would be helpful if we knew where that was, and then we would either look at the markings or we would ask Transport Scotland to do that.
Okay, Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. Actually, I just wanted to make a comment rather than a question. It's the joy of having a question that gets answered when you do your excellent presentation, so thank you very much. I think this is a very positive report, actually. Your mind automatically goes towards the red arrows going up rather than the green arrows going down, but actually we're doing exceptionally well, and I would like you to pass on that thanks. And basically, I just wanted to say that I think it's very positive that we're looking for a partnership way forward on the road traffic accidents. I was going to question what we were going to do to change this, because the trend is obviously concerning, but you've got that in hand, and I wanted to make that comment, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, and I'll pass on that comments to Billy and his team in Perth.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor McCall. Can we agree to note the contents of the report? Thank you. Item 5.2 is the Police Scotland report. Members will be aware that there are no figures with the report at this committee meeting. This is due to a national embargo on reporting as the national statistics are compiled. The fourth quarter and full year figures will be reported to this committee at its next meeting. We are looking to iron out the wrinkles between the quarterly police reporting cycle and the committee cycle. Members will be aware that we've had reports to committee, I think just before Christmas, where we had something like 3 weeks worth of figures to scrutinise, which isn't ideal. I think what we're going to do, and what I would very much like members' views for over the course of the summer, is to formalise the dates at which the quarterly reports from the police will come before this committee, and then for the committees that sort of happen in between the reporting cycle, whether we could have a more in-depth analysis of themes and issues which members of this committee would like to investigate further or to scrutinise further. So if you put your thinking caps on for that, and if you've got you know, any issues that you would like to have that sort of deeper dive into at a future date, we can try and program that into the committee cycle. You know, it may be issues to do with domestic violence, it may be issues to do with you know, youth causing annoyance, or you know, potentially particular rural crimes issues, or something that members have raised in the past. So I'd very much appreciate your feedback and your involvement in the development of that part of the programme. We do have the Q4 narrative for members who will see from the report that there has been significant success in investigating drug dealing and supply with cannabis seizures in Perth from a man running a mail order supply of sweet-soaked cannabis oil in Perth City. The Perth City Community Policing Team also played their part in a complex Perth-based operation which resulted in £100,000 worth of heroin being seized in Glasgow. It's also good to see the preventative work that's being done in partnership with local housing associations with regard to local residents and elderly residents and crimes of financial harm and bogus callers and telephone callers too. The work done with the Santander Bank in Perth to highlight to customers the tactics that criminals use to get members of the public to reveal personal information is again commendable in trying to prevent financial harm to vulnerable people. And I was also pleased to see the work that the police were doing with young people in Eastern Perthshire in Primary 7 pupils on their Internet Safety Day, and on a similar subject at Perth Grammar to do with indecent texts and safety for vulnerable young people. I think those are both examples of the sort of work and collaboration, proactive collaboration that led towards this council being assessed as being, you know, Scotland's foremost authority in terms of child protection with the report that was reported to council earlier. And with that, I'd like to invite Chief Superintendent Paul Anderson to speak to the report. He has come, as we were told previously, from the investigation regarding the suspicious death in Dunning. So if there's anything that you want to add regarding that, Paul, we'd be grateful. Thank you. Sorry, Paul, I don't think your mic's on.
How's this? Any better? I was terrible at karaoke. I really was. I was terrible. Mr. Convener, kind of councillors, thank you very much. Sorry I couldn't join you in the closed session. I've been dealing this morning with the very update that you've had from Chief Inspector Scott in regards to the suspicious death at Dunning. I have no further to add at this point. It was kind of updated in that closed session, and to assure you that the investigation is ongoing, and there is a considerable amount of resource now from across the whole of Police Scotland involved in answering the circumstances that led to the unfortunate death of the young lady. When we have more to tell you, I will come back, I will communicate via the convener, as we have done during the course of the week. What I would intend to do at the next scrutiny committee is to come back and in the closed session then to give you just a more kind of informed analysis of where we are in terms of the investigation. But needless to say, things will come out in the press, no doubt, as weeks progress. I welcome also the convener's comments in relation to the figures. The final year's figures will be out, as always, at the end of May when the embargo is lifted and the figures go through Scottish Government. There is a real opportunity there, and where I welcome the comments. I mean, in effect, the quarterly figures, I think quarter being the magic word, comes out that 4 times a year. So it's really important we kind of align kind of the times that we bring those figures to you in order that we can have, an informed conversation with regards all the data to hand. However, the opportunity that really presents around this is potentially your other 2 meetings a year. And earlier in the week when I was speaking to Peter, this is where I see the chance to come back. But what I would like to be able to bring to this committee is maybe my head of public protection, for instance. And we've got an opportunity to possibly do some deep dives into some subjects such as drugs. You look at the more complex and the wicked subjects dealing with kind of, children, young people, some troubled families issues, and to really highlight some of the partnership work and the things that I think you're going to be really interested in. And it will also help us with the policing plans and the partnership plans going into the following year to really inform that debate. So I would welcome that opportunity and that work, Mr. Scott, and kind of with the convener and the council will undertake to kind of look at those timings for the rest of the year. So that feedback I really do encourage, please. That will be helpful. Albeit I have no figures, and I know you've seen the Q3 figures. I think it would only be right of me just to comment on kind of where we're doing to date, just as we come now to the end of the performance year. I'm actually delighted to say, as you would have seen in the previous report, groups 1 to 5 crime is down. So that's extrapolating out. That's all crime, but you take out your road traffic from that and you take out what I call the proactive crimes. It's the crimes where the police have gone in and they've created a crime by the fact they've done something proactive. Could be around drug dealing, for instance, could be road traffic. It could be a number of things, but where a crime isn't naturally reported. So if you remember where we were at the start of the year, that was a very difficult, that was a very different time. And we had quite a difficult start to the year following kind of 2 or 3 kind of really positive years before that. So I'm absolutely delighted to see, following Ian and his locality team's good work, that's backing down. And I'm confident that when the Q4 figures come out, those numbers will bear through. The real success around that was within serious violence. At the beginning of the year, our serious violence figures were up. Something to stress, and when you look at the reports and when it gets to the next quarter, Perth Kinross is one of the safest places to live in Scotland. So when you're looking at your figures for robbery, when you're looking at your figures for serious violence, you're talking such small numbers that percentages are skewed significantly when dealing with those figures. So that to bear in mind. However, as we collapse towards the end of the year, I'm going to be delighted to report that we will be looking at a reduction in serious violence. And to couple with that, with serious assaults are down. The robbery aspect, and there was a number of robberies earlier in the year. I looked to Ian, at this point he's normally nodding at me or shaking his head, but there was a number of robberies within the Perth town centre area. And let's be clear, when I mean robbery, it doesn't necessarily mean someone's walked in. We're not talking an old-fashioned bank blagging. What we're talking about in general terms is where someone has offered threats or potentially suggestion or some form of violence. So it can be, there is a fair range in terms of when you discuss the word robbery. But the real positive thing and the work that Ian and his team have picked up in the last 6 months and bringing together the CID resources, the detection rate for the robbery offence is certainly looking back at Q3, and it will improve as we go into Q4 because detection rates pick up in the months after. When the investigations are concluded, they're going to be up and around 70%. So that's a really, really good, and that's a positive number. Just because the detection rate sits at 70%, where I am assured, doesn't mean you still have a continuing patterns of robberies. That means that all the offences haven't been either admitted or the evidence hasn't been there to submit to Crown to get that formal detection. That coupled with the last element of angst, which seems rather different compared with kind of the picture I've just painted, but shoplifting has been a significant issue in Perth and Kinross. I say Perth and Kinross, I'm going to be area specific now, specifically Perth City Centre, where we saw a significant rise earlier in the year. In the police, we always kind of look at 3 aspects when dealing with any crime. We will look at the victims, where's the stuff being stolen from, in simplicity. We will look at those committing the offenders, and we will look at kind of that locality, kind of, the general environment that it's sitting in. there wasn't, and what was really confusing at the beginning of the year, we didn't see any significant difference to kind of life as we see it in Perth. The police officers, the partners weren't reporting any great differences. Where the analysis started to reveal, and as we became successful in catching the people, there was a pattern starting of travelling criminality from within Tayside, from kind of surrounding towns and cities across the Tayside region, but also out with. There were links to substance misuse where they were picking up, in effect, methadone scripts from different areas. But once that pattern was picked up, we had the ability then to actually specifically target offenders, and through use of the courts, through use of the drugs misuse programs and targeting them at their homes rather than here waiting before they get here. And the significant resource that Ian and the team have put in with a specific operation around shoplifting. I'm already looking into the new figures going into the performance year, and you will see a reversal of that trend. We won't see what we've seen this time last year. However, there will be a health warning when you come with that. When you see, and you start there at the beginning of the year, when you open your report and you see, great, shoplifting has dropped by 15 or 20%. I like to say things as they are. That doesn't, it does sound really successful, and that's great. It means we've identified the problem and we've got to the nub of the problem. But what it means is we've got to grips with that spike, and it will be returning to levels that we would regard as normal over a period of time. So I'm not trying to take the polish off. I'm just trying to be really honest and say kind of as I find it, and certainly dealing with stats, but as a cop and as a street cop, that's a pleasing thing for me, because it goes back into us policing an environment where we know. So kind of when those spikes come in. Other areas I'd just like to talk about for kind of that we've encountered over the past year. But I mean, from my perspective, drugs has always been on my agenda. As the commander for Tayside, I mean, drugs don't sit in one area. And when you're dealing with supply and distribution, and at the closed session a quarter ago when I came and updated, I talked about the successes in relation to Operation Slate, and Operation Slate in the locality around Tayside. Just because we have a successful capture in one area, the drugs are generally bound for other areas. So it may not be in your area that we take a drug seizure, but those drugs are kind of bound for all of the communities of Scotland. With the specialist resources of Police Scotland, it looks like we're going to hit about £1 million worth of seizures. And that's not due to a rise in drugs, that's due to more effective tackling of the criminality. And one of the elements when I took up command here 2 years ago, I made very clear, chasing the users I didn't see as a positive use of my resource. That's got to be very much working with the council, the drugs diversion schemes, and with the partners. You can't arrest your way out of that problem. That's very much a health issue. And it's been really good with the Drugs Commission to see how that's really starting to take effect at the moment and get that. However, there's been some really positive kind of drug seizures which you're going to be aware of, and one significant one from in this area. So as that goes on and we get to the end of the year figures, I'll come back and give you an update of the specific seizures for Operation Slate. I don't see that changing anytime soon because you've got to keep the pressure up on that drugs market. And lastly, before I hand to Ian, because I want Ian to actually just come up and to talk about the elements in his report, because it's not me that does that, it's his teams, it's your new community teams, your locality teams that are going out to do that. But I think it would be wrong not to mention the recent Care Inspectorate report. And I look at the top table at the moment to kind of my colleagues in Perth and Kinross, but I was absolutely delighted to read the report of Perth and Kinross. I was delighted to really read the grades in terms of partnership working, in terms of leadership, and what that means for kind of children and young people in that area. And I would counsel you to look at the reports from elsewhere in the country, because I have no doubt that's probably one of the most, if not the most, positive report that I've read. Why I raise that, I'm very much into looking at things from, looking downwards, but looking at issues of troubled families, the way kind of things start in families, they are generational. So I'm talking about drugs. It starts with our children, it starts with our young people. And to have that endorsement in terms of the approach is sitting into everything that we've just talked about. So a huge congratulations for Perth and Kinross and the partners that contribute to that. Before I leave you, just go to Ian. If you want to know where my BDI sits for the coming year ahead, I will hold my still, because I don't believe in hopping from one crime type to another. Housebreaking, dwelling burglary, whatever you wish to call it, is still going to be a significant focus point of mine. This is a nice area, it's a beautiful area, it's an affluent area and a rural area, and at times we have in the last year, we still continue to get targeted by people committing housebreakings. And they'll do it for obviously easily obtainable commodities. And teams have been set up around the investigations to deal with not only the prevention aspects, but to find out who these people are, and when people are released from the criminal justice system in terms of integrated offender management, to try and get them before they're committing these offences. So for me, looking at this year, it's dwelling house breakings. It will be violence, which is always going to be high on my list. I will always look to the more serious end violence. I mean, for me, that's the very fabric of our society. Shoplifting is on there, and it is going to remain, because I'm not going to do all the work we've done in the last year and then just let that go. We need to understand, because we have seen a difference in our criminality. Markets change, commodities change, and we need to understand that. And Ian can come up and talk about that shortly. They've been first class with that. Robbery, and in terms of the detection rates, the numbers are so small. We're talking under 20 for the whole of Perth and Kinross when you're just looking at Q3, compared with other areas in the country, which does make things easier to get a positive detection rate, I hasten to add. However, when you have rural areas, it does take forensic opportunities out. And the last one for me will always be for drugs. And notwithstanding that, and listening to my colleague up here recently, not too long ago, kind of road traffic, we've got dedicated road traffic units. Our continued work in relation to the A9, and I do hear what you're saying in the A9, and I turned to Ian and whispered, do we have that data? Is that something that we can have a look at? We will do. However, I'm not aware of a great deal of fatals that have been caused by that. The majority of fatal or serious accidents that look at in Perth and Kinross and wider Tayside for that period, in general terms, have related to speed, driver behaviour, and sometimes just damn bad luck in kind of some of the extreme weather situations we've had. And there's been a couple of local accidents where I don't know so much I would use the word of act of God, but the sets of circumstances have just been absolutely tragic for all concerned. But on that, it was, I've been away for 4 months, and it felt like every time I turn up, I'm the bringer of doom. It's been great for 4 months. I come back and you're being braced about a suspicious death. But hopefully I'll have more to tell you about that. Maybe if Ian would come up and he could talk about some of the local aspects. Before I sit, is there any specific questions?
Thanks very much for that, Chief Superintendent. I appreciate some of the candour in your comments there. Ian, if you want to proceed up, and Councillor McCall, do you want to ask a question?
I don't know whether I was going to be in the right place, but I think I'm going to ask it now. Obviously, there's been a lot of reports regarding you can get drugs faster than you can get a pizza, and using children at the age of 13 to deliver and network to get drugs distributed round. Obviously, if you read this report, it seems as if we have a cannabis problem more than anything else. But are we in the area of having anything like that within Perth and Kinross, or is it very much a case of this is the sort of thing that hasn't hit us yet?
The reason I'm thinking so deeply about the question, I just want to be able to give you an informative and honest answer. So I'm going to answer it from the top and work my way downwards. Drug supply and drugs use is not new. You can know that. It's more than generational. It goes back a considerable time and through my entire career and lifetime in policing. So dealing with serious and organised crime, we are now, as Police Scotland, and one of the wonderful things about Police Scotland, having no boundaries, no borders, and big central teams that can follow these people across those boundaries, we're identifying the organised crime groups. So the success of Operation Slate, which I come and talk to you about, is our success in tackling that serious and organised crime. Taking it down and taking it to the next level and saying, where do I think there are drug problems, there is more than cannabis at play here across the whole of Tayside and Perth and Kinross. Class A drugs, but there's also been emergence of new markets, because we need to understand, you've heard about talks of legal highs, there's been worrying trends across Scotland and the whole of the UK in terms of steroids and steroid abuse and abuse of substances which kind of at time of writing were legal. So it's that full range, and that's for me why it sits around children, a young person, health and education. So that's where I'm pleased. So I don't think there's a greater cannabis problem. When you look at the figures, and I'm really candid and honest, I mean, you'd worked that out in the past 2 years, when you say, oh great, the crimes have gone down by 300, remember there's been no tea in the park last year, and I did go back and check, and surprisingly enough, the number there was about 300. So what I'm seeing is a picture which I would regard as the norm. I'm seeing more success at the top. In relation to pizza, I don't know where you get your pizzas from, so I'll answer. That's a question I simply can't answer. What I've seen, nothing's ever surprised me as a cop. I've seen some creative and I've seen some innovation about how crime's happened. Crime is moving from what I knew as a boy up in the hills, what my mum and dad would know, what you would all know, and as we're moving into a digital age, I am now seeing, and I have over the past 10 years, crime move onto mobile phones, which is more powerful than any computers we have. Digitalisation, which allows encryption, so you heard of WhatsApp and a kind of, various social kind of media networks. But that also gives us technical opportunities to track these people. So what I would say is crime is moving in how it's delivered. So can drugs be got online? The whole of our society is starting in some form to operate online. So it requires us as an organisation to now reconfigure in terms of our technical capability, looking to the future for our cops, our mobility, to make sure they're all kind of cyber enabled as such. They understand modern technology, but that's where it's going. But that's where the whole of society is going. I just see it as transporting. It's a different era and a different time. Things are just being done differently. Rather than cycling from A to B, we're then driving, we're then doing something else. Does that answer the question? Because it's a really difficult one.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor McKeon, did you want your question now, or can you wait till after Chief Inspector Scott's? Okay, thanks for that.
I was rather hoping you weren't keeping all your questions for myself, but thanks for that, Councillor. And it may surprise you to know I do like the odd slice of pizza, so it's. I think the report, as the elected members and conveners wishes, it captures a lot of the proactive and preventative work we're doing across the length and breadth of the area, particularly focusing on young people to give them healthy outcomes. And I think that's hopefully what you want. If you feel you want other topics raised, then please feel free to get in touch with me. Just to catch up with a couple of the things that have been mentioned in the other presentations, in a similar manner to fire and rescue, we've also, I would love to say, modified our response plans for Perth Bridge. I've asked folk not to go over there on blue lights, so hopefully that will keep that infrastructure safe, and that's been tasked out. Also, a little about speeding vehicles and motorcycles. It obviously is an issue across the whole of the country, and Perth and Kinross, with it being such a nice area to drive through, visit. But we did have nationally 2 fatalities related to motorcycles over the weekend. Fortunately not here, but on another weekend it could have easily been ourselves. Councillor Shires was asking if there's any statistics. The motorcycles are involved about 2% of road traffic collisions, but 20% of killed or seriously injured. So it's that there's maybe not a lot of motorcycles involved with accidents, but when they are, they can have catastrophic injuries. And I can think of a couple off the top of my head. We had one 2 or 3 weeks coming down from Glenshee, a Polish national, for whatever reason, came around the corner on the wrong side of the road and struck a vehicle. How does one prevent that is a challenge. And we look at speeding and enforcement, education. Within Perth and Kinross, roughly we speak about 40 people a week getting charged with speeding offences. That's across the sort of range, not just motorcycles, but all road users. So that enforcement does take place, that education does take place. We do get provided information from Scottish Government and the research, mentioning motorcycles. There's no real surprises there, I would say, for those that have been involved in road safety for a long time. We know the key periods are Saturday and Sunday afternoons. We know it's between 2 and 4. We know it's males, and we know it's people around my age, 25 to 40, that are going to 40 to 55. Who are going to be involved in that. So it's how we reach out and try and educate people, and we are working with Trunk Road Policing Group, Divisional Road Policing Unit and locality officers to try and intervene with motorcyclists, whether they're in groups or singly, to provide that education. But I don't think I mentioned it to the committee, but 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe slightly longer ago, unmarked police vehicle in coming out of Balbeggie, a motorcycle rose past doing 137 miles an hour. It's really challenging, and you would think by now, particularly motorcyclists would be aware of the risk they're putting themselves and other road users at, but it is a constant battle, unfortunately. So that maybe gives you some of the indication around speeding and motorcycling, what we're looking to do. In addition to that, in I think it was last week's Commander's Bulletin that I put out, I asked for residents, elected members, if they have particular concerns about either antisocial use of vehicles or speeding, to come back in touch with us to tell us, where do you think we should be? We probably know, and we can't be everywhere, obviously, if we're in around Dunning and Auchterarder, doing the reassurance investigation. We can't be every road end trying to do speeders, but what we can is over the year try to program things in, so when there is quiet at times that we can respond to local concerns, and I'm happy to do that. And part of the rollout of the locality plans, we're developing 5 locality plans for Perth and Kinross around the co-terminus areas. And inspectors will lead on that so we understand. Yes, we have those high-level criminality, whether it's serious and organised crime, whether it's drug misuse, etc. But for an awful lot of our communities, we're lucky to say that they'll never see a serious assault or a robbery, but they'll hear a vehicle screeching around, going to work or whatever, the exhaust blowing, or be scared that there's trucks going past on a road that's maybe designated as 30 that they may feel is doing 45 or 50. If we get that fed back, we can then go and do some of that work to educate, prevent, maybe look at the road design, link in with partners from other agencies and the roads to see what can be done. So a lot of work getting done there. On the drugs theme, I was just looking to update, I suppose, elected members on a problem probably going back around 4 years that it was concentrated in Perth but affected communities across the area, was the head shops, the legal high shops, or the new psychoactive substance shops, a couple of which we had in Perth, and the adverse and corrosive effect that was having on not just young people but a range of our community. And I know there was a lot of talk at the time as to what health, police, council were able to do with it, and there was that anomaly, what they call it, a loop in the legislation or whatever else. It took a long while to get sorted, but as you'll be aware, that the shops are now closed and sentenced at the High Court, I think 3 weeks ago. The individuals that were running shops in Perth and Angus received sentences of 4.5 years. So yes, the wheels of justice turn slowly, and we had to be creative in the legislation that we could use, but to try and reassure you, we got there in the end, and hopefully that'll have a positive effect on the life chances of people in the area. A couple of other things to just mention. The report, we come into the summer period, we have an awful lot of events. I'd love to say it's great for Perth and Kinross to be the host of so many events. I think the Medieval Championships, that was a new one to me last week. I'm sometimes called a bit of a dinosaur, so they want me out there. But, again, great to host these sort of events, but it does give challenges. We've got Perth races today. We've got the big weekend coming. I believe Lionel Richie is dancing about on the ceiling somewhere, and then we've got Rewind. I was at a meeting at Glen Eagles there in the week for the Euro Championships. So a really heavy event schedule, of which we try to play a part with the local authority and those that are organising these events. But we can't take them for granted. We also, I think we've got the ATAP this weekend. Looking for confirmation of that. So some of us, again, longer in the tooth, will remember the challenges that probably brought 8 or 9 years ago. So a load of work ongoing. I'm just going to touch on some of the work done in relation to water safety. Obviously, as the weather hopefully continues to improve, we look to support from education, local authority and elected members just about that water safety message. Not just for young people, maybe having fun, but taking a bit of risk-taking behaviour, but also in relation to, I look at the boss for kayakers, I think of the fishermen and ladies that come, and yes, the business benefit that brings to the area, but also the need for their safety to be considered. So we look to encourage that responsible enjoyment of the area. That's probably the main themes I'd look to set out, and I'm delighted to take any questions you may have.
Thanks very much for that, Chief Inspector Scott. I'm sure if you retire from the police, you can get a job with the Perthshire Tourist Board. I think you've managed to plug every single event in our events calendar, as well as promising good weather. So, Councillor McEwen, you were first.
A comment before my question relating to what you've been saying. I think we should paint white arrows on our carriageways and A-class roads to help people who don't normally drive on the left-hand side of the road adhere to that, because that is just a visual reminder to them.
And I know what's been done previously in identified hotspots, particularly of the A9 and some of the junctions that have been mentioned there, to remember to keep to the correct side of the road and hours, etc. Unfortunately, individuals, for whatever historical or personal reasons, if they come from other countries, occasionally they make a mistake, and it can prove life-changing.
Yeah. The question I had, though, was around the 2 arrests you had for cannabis oil getting put into sweets. Any discussions I've ever had in my professional career around cannabis oil is that it doesn't contain any psychoactive cannabinoids, and it's used by people because they believe they've got a health benefit from it. That aside, or is this another mechanism in which the dealers are using to actually distribute full cannabis with psychoactive properties?
I think there's potentially the 2 different aspects to that, and there's obviously the international debate about the use of cannabis for health issues, whether that's related to chronic pain or disability, and which, yes, we would, if brought to our attention, look to implement and enforce in a sympathetic manner, looking to direct people to specialist services, and any report would include any information that the person brought to us. Unfortunately, in this case, I think that the criminality was much more destructive. It was looking to engage particularly young people. The range of sweets were there to encourage them to take sweets that, whether they would have psychoactive benefits or not, certainly that was the intention.
Also on the pizza front, 25 years in Glasgow, you could get a pizza with special herbs on it in certain eateries.
Again, mentioned tea in the park, and I go back probably 15 years, and I still had a good appetite at the time, and was offered a cup of coffee, which I refused, and then perhaps, obviously, you prefer a brownie instead. And just as I reached into this lovely Tupperware top of brownie, the kind lady said that perhaps that would be best not taken. So nothing new. It was a good weekend.
Thank you for that. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener. to a couple of comments and then a question. So just to echo the Chief Superintendent's comments about the inspection report, I think he downplayed a little bit his involvement in that process. Having been with him on the first morning that the inspectors were in Perth Kinross at the North End campus, and the presentation that was put forward by Mr Anderson about the role that they play in working with us and indeed with the Fire and Rescue Service and the third sector. It really does demonstrate the breadth of partnership working and the benefits that has, and then all through this report it highlights the work particularly with young people. I also, on a very personal level, wanted to thank the police for the support in the Blairgowrie area over the winter months. Didn't have any complaints really this year about skiing, you'll be glad to know, and people not being able to get up there, so thank you for that. And my question was about working with licensed premises, particularly over if we're going to have balmy summer months like this, because it'll be like this for the rest of the summer. I know, being involved with the pub watch scheme in East Perthshire, that Inspector Thompson has done a lot of work there, but there's still premises that are not engaging with pub watch, and I dare say in Perth City that's a similar scenario, and elsewhere in Perth and Kinross. And it's to find out what work's been done around the whole licensed premises, and particularly the underage drinking, which is a problem.
Again, I would probably say over the decades, licensed premises nationally, and including Perth and Kinross, have probably never been run better. There's a professionalism and a positivity that make them safe places, and whether that's Purple Flag or whatever else that's been done, it is positive. The majority of underage drinking is probably supported by parents, friends and siblings. Not to say that it doesn't happen. We under Police Scotland are much more on the front foot in relation to visits to licensed premises. On an average weekend, which will cover the Friday, Saturday, Sunday evening, we will have recorded visits to in excess of 50 licensed premises across Perth and Kinross, and that is just to put our heads in the door, speak with patrons to make sure that the premises are being well run, and to give you the sort of detail that we would do there. We obviously speak to any door stewards, make sure that they're approved, but we'll be looking at around how many glasses of bottles are on the table, what are the queues like at the bar. So those friction points would be addressed and spoken to at the time, and then taken to our licensing team, which Mike Whitford, a former Chief Inspector here, leads upon to make sure that those longer term issues, if we are identifying problem premises, are challenged, supported and educated, and ultimately, if need be, then reported to the Procurator Fiscal Service.
Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener. I'm delighted to see the efforts being made by the Perth City Community Policing team in relation to educating children and young adults in relation to indecent communications online, and etc., and also cyberbullying. That's commendable, and I was just wondering if there are any plans to widen that out to rural Perthshire and other communities.
Yes, and Mr Anderson spoke about the changing face of, I'm going to use criminality here, and it's probably not the right word. A lot of the indecent communication is between consenting young people maybe making some wrong choices and doing things that they maybe later regretted. It doesn't tend to be so much contact sexual assaults. It's the sharing of image and maybe inappropriate language, which yes, I struggle with, but that's maybe an intergenerational thing, and it is that wider discussion for us to have as a society, whether that's education. Probably police aren't the best people to be involved in it. It is parents, it is peer support as to the consequences of an idea or an action that seemed like a good idea at the time. And yes, that does continue out with not just Perth, but Perth and Kinross, but across the country. We're looking to get that message out. As I say, education is so much better in enforcement, because we don't want to criminalise young people for making a mistake where there potentially was no malice. And again, any report that was submitted would include that background and context, so that the Fiscal Service has a full idea of what's been reported.
Okay. Sorry, did you want to come back there, Councillor Braun?
Thank you, Convener. Just a few questions, if I may. First of all, on page 43 of our report, there's an article regarding an incident in Blairgowrie regarding somebody taking in, I presume, replica firearms and converting them to real firearms. And we've touched on gangland problems where there are more guns being used. Is this likely to be a growing trend? I'm not necessarily in Blairgowrie, but generally.
No, we've had over the years, we get people maybe have an interest in firearms that may try to change or modify weapons for whatever reason. Probably not in relation to serious organised crime. Probably more out of an interest in firearms. One of the aspects is it's a danger to themselves, and that might seem a little bit surreal. You think you've got a criminal there, but any technical modification to an inactive firearm has inherent dangers, and we would discourage that at any time. And when the information comes to ourselves, then we'll act with great haste.
And the other thing I was going to ask, we've mentioned burglaries. Just from your point of view, what can the public do if they confront a burglar in their home? Obviously, there was a high profile incident south of the border.
Yes.
And the reports on that obviously discuss things from the English law's point of view, but I believe our laws up here are slightly different. So what can you do?
So there's a range of things. I've spoken by theft by housebreakings, as I like to refer to them, and the three sort of relatively distinct elements we have in relation to sheds or garages, commercial premises, and then what I would class as a traditional housebreaking where somebody's home is involved. The vast majority, and bear in mind Mr. Anderson's comments that the numbers are relatively low, of houses, they are targeted because they're obviously vacant at the time. If we have, put a figure on it, we would have maybe a handful of housebreakings in Perth and Kinross in a year where the residents are there, and potentially they may come home. What we'd ask them to do is obviously phone 999 straight away. A lot of it is about that preventative side. As I said, it's houses that, particularly travelling criminals, they'll drive into a quiet street, do a recce, identify which house appears to be empty, drop a couple of folk off. They will go and break in through a window, steal anything that may be of value, potentially medication, any cash. It's amazing how many houses seem to have euros in them or other foreign currencies and jewellery, and they're in and out in 10 or 15 minutes. They're not looking to pose any significant harm to the occupants. They're just looking to steal for the criminal purposes. If someone does come across someone breaking into the house, I personally think that human nature will kick in, and that'll be they'll either flight or fright. They'll run away, freeze, or will engage them. And I don't think very few people will have any option as to which one it takes them. Generally speaking, and I know there was one up the Glasgow road where the elderly chap had come back unexpected, and they stubbed a young lad breaking into his property and then offered him a lift to the bus stop, I think it was. Probably look for people not to overreact. It's obviously a horrendous experience to be a victim of a domestic housebreaking, but you are entitled to defend yourself and your property. So certainly, if you feel you have the confidence and nature kicks in, then yes, you are able to defend yourself and your property. What you're not able to do is chase somebody down the street with a golf club, batter them on the back of the head. It's got to be proportionate and realistic at the time. Hopefully that gives you an indication as to where the police and the Crown Office would be.
And one last point, coming back to speeding traffic mentioned. I'm fielding a lot of questions about speeding in my area. I know my two co-councillors are here today with a new snow road opening up, which we all support as a big bringer of business. And more people up there to monitor speed, more police officers there. I know there was one up there recently. Somebody told me they went through it and successfully passed through the speed.
So there's various things that I'd love to say. I would put officers on at every point. As you know, we can, and I'm not. And I know that's not what you mean, but we'll have to look at other ways we can look at it. So the roads can look at the average speed detection. We've got to make sure, is there a problem, or is it the perception of a large vehicle or a noisy motorcycle? Once we establish there's a problem, then yes, we are happy to work with others, but the additional signage, speed activated signage that's gone up, I think that's a good idea. It can't sit there forever, because then it just becomes background. But how the local authority have identified areas, got funding to increase the number of these cameras can be done. We will be prioritising the 85 and the 93 at weekends, because that's where we feel we can maybe have an impact on the reduce of killed, seriously injured. And as unfortunately as the boss says, sometimes people are just unlucky. There's bits of tree come down, there's a freak accident, and there is that. But I certainly hear what's being said, and with motorcyclists aside, the vast majority of people that are speeding in our area are our residents, and that's where we have to go to say that you're putting your own children, families and neighbours at risk.
Just a final point, if I may, Convener. Can members of the public be trained to monitor traffic? I've heard of this being done before.
So we've got a trial in Highland Perthshire that Councillor Williamson's to look to do. We're trying to identify, again, an area where we know there is a problem, and the term pop-up policeman is used. So it's that education, enforcement, engaging with the community. If members of the community are keen to try and do something locally on their area, then we will support that with an education enforcement phase. But again, it's going back to the locality plans. While the majority of officers live in the area, occasionally one or two streets or communities are particularly adversely affected, and we will try to support them. But it can't just, it's got to be evidence-based. It can't just be the worried well that get the resources.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor McCall, can make yours the last question and then move on.
Thank you, Convener. My question is in relation to the Safer Internet Day that you do, particularly with schools and with young people. And from reading your report, it's really to do with online fraud and safety. But I'm also wondering if there's any inclusion there about the access to online pornography that's particularly prevalent, it would seem, among young people, and therefore the changing attitudes towards sexual attitudes, and in particular what consent means in schools.
Yeah, I think I saw Katrina at the far end, did I? No, I didn't. To see what we do at the education is primarily the forefront of that. It's about being a responsible citizen. It's about respecting classmates, family members, and gender on a wider basis. So that measure does go out. The next 2 or 3 weeks we have safe Taysiders running along the Dunkeld Road at the barracks. Again, that's a feature. It's about bringing the different elements that affect communities and young people together, so that safety is not looked in isolation, whether it's fire safety, water safety, internet safety or personal safety. It's about being a responsible and an aware citizen, and that's certainly our push.
I think you don't have the eyesight of a 20-year-old Chief Inspector. Okay, can we agree to note the paper? Thank you. Can I suggest that we have a short break until 11:45, comfort break, and then resume for the rest of the agenda? Thank you. Item 4 on our agenda is the Community Planning Partnership update. The report highlights the successes of the most recent round of participatory budgeting events in Perth and Kinross, with 151 local projects benefiting from a total of just under £250,000. One of the features of this round of PB that I would particularly like to highlight was the participation of our Health and Social Care Partnership, and I'm grateful for their collaboration in making one stronger community engagement between the public and the public sector. Again, it would be remiss of me not to mention the success of the PB team in winning the Provost Award last night at the Securing the Futures award ceremony. So well done to Dave and the team there. Fairer Futures, as the report says, leads from all our community planning partners have been identified to take forward the individual recommendations of the Fairer Futures report. We've also had a refocus on a small number of priority areas to take forward. These are particularly for looked after children to develop a guarantee of work experience for looked after children who do not move on to positive destinations of education or find work. There's a further focus on tackling health inequalities for prisoners and for improving prisoner health. And targeted work to improve the numbers of mothers from deprived areas who breastfeed. And finally, with the imminent rollout of full service universal credit coming next month, the Fairer Futures Group has been working to support local people to migrate onto universal credit. The Deputy Director and I met with the DWP recently to discuss how council services, including libraries, welfare rights staff and partners such as the CAB, Skills Development Scotland, the College and the DWP themselves can provide support for vulnerable claimants. And the Deputy Director will speak to the review of local decision-making section of the report, and then we'll open for questions. So, Keith.
Sorry, my apologies. The What Works Scotland report is based on the work of Dr Claire Biner, who many members may recall from the Community Planning Conference last November. What Works Scotland is a collaboration between Glasgow and Edinburgh universities who look at best practice for community empowerment, community engagement across Scotland, across the UK and indeed worldwide. And they have an analytical framework by which they assess the progress with local democracy and local empowerment. Councillors will recall there was a briefing session on the 4th of May which several members present today attended. Some members couldn't make the session and the session was videoed, and I think the link to that has been passed out. And I think that helped from Dr Biner's perspective, explaining the main background to the report and what our findings are. We're currently going through a process of engaging with action partners around what their perceptions of the findings of the report are, and indeed the Community Planning Partnership Executive Officer Group as well. So we're taking soundings from several sources. If I may, Convener, just a couple of comments around the report. The report has commented that from the experience of What Works Scotland, our activities around action partnerships are still in their infancy, but they have taken substantial steps to achieve outcomes for community empowerment, and it does show a higher level of support for local decision making, but there's more that can be done. They talk about creating a long-term platform, and the analysis from focus groups with elected members and indeed community representatives was that if action partnerships didn't exist, then they would probably be created in some kind of shape or form anyway. And Dr Biner at the briefing session on the 4th of May used an analogy which I thought was very telling around if we keep changing the hardware of what action partnerships and what local democracy is about, we'll not be able to load up the software in terms of what we actually want to achieve. I think that was quite telling. I think there's other things highlighted from the report around changing the cultural approach to engagements, a more facilitative style of leadership, so that there's an equal partnership between the community planning partners, between elected members and community representatives. And I think that's showing through, certainly from my experience of action partnerships, but again I think there's more to be done. She set out a challenge in terms of being more inclusive, both in terms of the types of involvements we have, so things like mini publics where you actually try and approach people who maybe wouldn't normally come to action partnerships or community councils or local democratic engagement and get more involvement, and that can be supported by things like paying for childcare or travel costs to get a wider representation of people. So I think that's a fair and reasonable challenge. And I think they also see it as a challenge in terms of communications. I think there is still more work we can do in terms of communicating between what action partnerships are about, what other local groups are, democratic groups such as the community councils, etc. And I know the team have an action plan for taking that forward. So we're assimilating the comments from across the board and look to bring a report to Council in June. Thank you, Convener. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, do we have any questions? Do we agree to note the report? Thank you. Item 6 on the agenda is a presentation on the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Transformation Consultation. Members have had the opportunity to meet with the local senior officer to hear about the transformation and to provide feedback during the course of those meetings and the consultation period. We've got a presentation from Claire Mailer which draws together the feedback provided by members to date. So I'll just ask Claire to jump straight in with the presentation.
Okay, as Councillor Barrett said, the purpose of this presentation is to give committee members a brief overview of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Services consultation on its proposed transformation. We want to seek your agreement with the proposed response, but also incorporate any feedback that you might have this morning. I'm grateful to Gordon and colleagues for remaining for this session so they can answer any of the complicated questions that you might have at the end of my presentation. The consultation was launched in February, and since then the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have been collating the views of public, its partners and a wide range of services and organisations nationally. The consultation did in fact close on Monday, but we'd asked for an extension in terms of our submission to enable us to have this discussion at committee today. An officer within Housing and Environment has been collating responses from across the council, across a number of services across the council, but also many of you may have attended elected member briefing sessions in April that were held by the fire service to collate the views and opinions of elected members. I've summarised the collated feedback in the last few slides of the presentation. Okay, so the consultation document initially provides an overview of the need for change, explaining that the creation of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service back in 2013 has been very positive in delivering operational and financial efficiencies by bringing the previous 8 brigades together as one. It explains that the operating model was designed to meet the risks of the 1940s and explains that whilst there has been a significant decrease in fires over the last 10 years, new and emerging risks are appearing that need to be addressed. And as a result of this, the service is no longer as efficient or as flexible as it could be. The consultation document explains how risks have changed. There have been a 40% decrease in fires over the last 10 years, but significant and new risks are now emerging, and some of those are detailed on the slide. International terrorism is a very real risk that the UK and indeed Scotland can't ignore. Firefighters obviously play a vital role in emergency medical responses. We have an ageing population that we're all very aware of, and as a result of that, there are different demands and pressures on services in terms of preventing harm and preventing risks within the home environment. Severe weather incidents, as we're all aware, are much more extreme and their impacts are much more acute, and that increases risks to lives. And therefore, the service has highlighted the need for firefighters to be trained and equipped to meet these new risks. Furthermore, it highlights that at the moment, personnel and resources are not fully aligned with need. So the current operating model as it is highlights that the service has the same number of firefighters and appliances available at all times during the day and at night. Stats, however, indicate that responses and incidents mainly occur during the daytime, so there's a need to review that. Many of you will be aware that many of the fire stations operate on the retained duty model, where crew members are on-call firefighters in our more rural communities, and that delivery model is no longer robust due to some recruitment and the availability of crew. Okay, so the key issues that I described in the last slide are really the drivers for change that have highlighted the need for major transformation. And in response, the Fire Service has prepared a number of key proposals that are contained within the consultation document. One key theme that runs throughout the document is that focus on prevention, protection and response to improve the safety and well-being of communities. They describe how by extending their approach to prevention in areas such as antisocial behaviour, reducing offending and tackling domestic abuse, slips, trips and falls, they can make that contribution to reducing demand for services and focusing on some of our wider national outcomes. In order to address the issues of resources and the need of services not being fully aligned, they intend to review their approach and introduce a more flexible and responsive crewing model. One area that they also want to review is the station footprint, and I would say that this is one area that I think elected members and respondents were very interested in. They want to ask if the location, the fire appliances and the staffing levels within the stations are right for the service that they now need to deliver. And they want to look at obviously activity levels, instances of false alarms, concentration of stations, and they hope to establish if they can deliver or introduce a more effective approach going forward. The fourth bullet point there, straightforward, obviously it relates to adopting the latest technology in the field to deliver a more efficient and safer model of operation. And the Fire Service also recognises the need to take positive steps to improve the availability of the retained duty system appliances, as rural communities should expect the same level of protection as urban areas. And again, that came out very strongly in terms of the consultation and the feedback. So they do detail their intention to reduce a more integrated programme to strengthen the retained duty system and improve this availability. Okay, the benefits of the proposed transformation are there detailed on the slide. They hope that the transformation benefits will give the ability to create a service that's designed to meet today's risks but also those of the future, to deliver their current role but more efficiently and effectively, to protect and enhance frontline delivery, and to improve safety in rural communities by strengthening the retained duty system, and to undertake that broader role that I explained in terms of the vital preventative work that they undertake. This slide here just gives a bit of an overview, so I won't go into it in detail, but it summarises the information that's just been contained on the last slides. So, what has our response been? The consultation takes respondents through a series of questions, and these are summarised. Our response, or our proposed response to these questions, are summarised on the slides. So what do we consider are the main benefits for Scotland? Respondents agreed that a reduction in fires obviously represents an opportunity for the service. Transformation will allow the benefit of significant resources to be used more effectively and efficiently. And obviously there's an opportunity to encourage even greater partnership working across all areas of the community planning partnerships and the delivery of improved outcomes for the public. There were a series of statements that we had to respond to, and again this reflects respondents. We trust that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to change its operating model, including the station footprint. Respondents overwhelmingly agreed with that. Firefighters should be trained and equipped to meet the new and emerging risks that Scotland faces. I don't think there was any disagreement there. Firefighters should be rewarded for taking on an expanded role and in accordance with the risks that they take. I have to say, generally, people were sort of feeling, well, that's not really something for us to determine. That's something that would have to happen in-house. There was no real opinion on that one. The latest technology should be used where possible to improve firefighter and public safety. Overwhelming agreement there. Firefighters could be trained to take on roles that would reduce the burden on other public services. Yes, agreement on that. A more flexible approach to the crewing during the late evening and early morning hours would allow firefighters to do more during the day when demand is higher. And again, agreement on that one. So this just gives a bit more detail in terms of some of the statements to sort of back up some of those responses. So generally, we're supportive of the approach to transformation, which should protect the service and the service provided to the public. We agree that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service has the capacity and the capability to take on that broader role, which will not only benefit the public but also other public services in terms of that increasing emphasis on preventative work. I think there was overwhelming agreement that we've got some very good examples here in Perth and Kinross in terms of transformation, and we would encourage that continued commitment to the principles of partnership working and preventative approach. Respondents also indicated that the geography of Perth and Kinross is such that there's a real need to both retain and develop fire safety in our rural communities. That was throughout the consultation document in terms of the service's intention to do that, but that was absolutely further emphasised by respondents to the consultation. Consultation asked, what is the single most important thing to us about the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service? And again, overwhelmingly, the capability to provide an appropriate response when needed to a variety of emergencies, both in urban and rural communities. Is there anything that we feel the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service should not do as part of its transformation? And the response there was, we do not want the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to lose its focus on existing partnership arrangements, to close the station within the city boundaries, to reduce any level of service delivery within our rural communities. And we don't want the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to transform to the extent that it loses its primary focus and the delivery of core services is compromised. So that came out sort of fairly strongly. A few final comments we were asked for. So overarchingly, we agree in principle to the transformation proposals and are obviously supportive of the need to transform. We recognise the valuable role that the service can play in terms of prevention. However, we feel that we better need to understand how the proposals will affect all residents within Perth and Kinross. And we would like assurance that before any changes, the impact within Perth and Kinross are decided, full consultation with residents, partners, stakeholders and communities will take place. So bearing in mind this is a very high level national document that's looking at transformation across the full Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, respondents here locally are saying, we understand that, we agree with that, but we really want further consultation, ongoing dialogue, so that we can really understand what that means here locally for Perth and Kinross, but also locally within our communities. So ongoing and further consultation. So final comments there, we would therefore ask the service to continue to engage with us at a local level throughout the transformation and provide us with information and opportunities to continue to influence local decision making. We'd also like to see an evaluation of the projected benefits to be realised from the transformation programme, and in particular the projected benefits again here within Perth and Kinross and how that will impact. Okay, so that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour through it. As I say, colleagues are here hopefully to answer any questions that you might have. We are asked, as I say, to consider and agree the response to the consultation. And if you've got any additional comments or views that you would like to be included, then we're able to take that on. We've got until Friday to submit the consultation.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Claire. Can I ask Local Senior Officer Gordon Pride if he wants to say anything by way of response before we open up to questions?
I promise to keep it brief. A lot of the points have been covered, and I've also come in and spoken to members a couple of times. So I won't repeat anything, but just really to give the reassurance that we're looking to go on a transformational journey. You seem to have supported it in the main through the comments. And as a role of Local Senior Officer, I'll be the local contact with my team based here to make sure that we communicate as readily as possible. We make sure we go through this journey together, and it's not just with members, but it's with communities, and make sure we get a fit and appropriate fire and rescue service for Perth and Kinross going forward. So I'd just like to offer that reassurance and willing to accept any questions, whether it be now or through the next number of years as the transformation journey proceeds.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. I've got two sort of questions. One's for perhaps Claire and one's for Mr. Pride, if I may. The first one for Claire, with including in the response, is could we encourage within our response as part of the partnership working that the fire service look at co-locating in any future estate strategy. I'm thinking in Pitlochry, where the police and fire service are based on the same site, although not in the same building, but the community hospital would probably be a much better hub for all the emergency services, and within the partnership working of the transformation project, I think that would be beneficial. But that's just an example from my ward, but I'm sure there are others. The point for Mr. Pride was related to, would the retained crews that are being looked at in terms of being replaced by full-time, presumably, will that then mean a reduction in the number of stations, I'm assuming, as well, particularly in the rural areas? I know we've talked a lot about protecting rural areas within our response, but my concern is obviously if, for example, my ward goes down to one station at Pitlochry, we're looking at response times of, even with blue lights, probably over an hour to certain parts of it. So it's just concerns around that.
If I could ask Gordon to respond to your second question, then the Director will respond to your first one.
Looking at the models going forward, what we'll look to do is make sure we engage fully with all partners. All local communities will engage with their staff in stations, and we'll make sure that if there is any change to footprints, the document itself identifies we're not looking to reduce the numbers from a cut perspective, but it's really the location, and make sure we have the right footprint in the right locations. We have 356 fire stations through Scotland, and that's one of our strengths. If we were to lose numbers, we'd lose part of our strengths from that breadth. But once we get down to that detail, I'll make sure I communicate it back with this committee and also the groups. Also, if I can touch on the first part, if that's okay, Convener, about the co-location, we have a tripartite agreement with police and ambulance service just now at a director level, where they are beginning to develop processes where we can make sure that if we are looking to look at premises, we look at premises and see how we can best co-locate between the three agencies. A local example just now will be, we're looking to bring the Scottish Ambulance Service into Balmossy and Dundee. So there are other areas throughout Scotland where that structure works and works well. And it's something we'll be looking to go forward from a just efficient and effective position.
And just as a follow-up to that, obviously, you know, sort of there's the work that we're doing, you know, sort of across the council in terms of our corporate portfolio, but equally, you know, sort of across the three former Tayside local authorities, there's a bit of work in terms of one public estate, which follows on from a national lead about all, you know, sort of public bodies trying to reduce, you know, sort of the amount of property that they have in terms of savings. So we would be keen to work, obviously, and we have discussed on many occasions in the past about co-location, not just within police and ambulance service and Scottish Fire and Rescue, but with ourselves as well.
Thank you.
Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not sure who to address this question to, so I'll address it to the floor. It's really about, I was interested to hear that the, as part of the rostering review, that most incidents take place during the day. But what I would be interested in is whether or not the capacity required to respond to incidents during the day and late evening, early morning and during the night reflects and tracks the same way. Because while lots of incidents may happen, they may require a low level of capacity to respond, whereas incidents, very often out of hours if you want, may be more major and may require a greater degree of capacity. So I'd be very keen to ensure the capacity was retained that tracked the capacity requirements currently.
That certainly sounds like one for Mr. Pride, in my view.
There's a couple of issues. Obviously, through the report, it's identified 80% of the fires occur during the day. The cause of fires tend to be men, women and children. It's people and their acts or omissions that cause the fires. So that's where their elements are. But there are a number of significant incidents that happen throughout Scotland, whether that be the recent fire in the city centre of Glasgow. So part of our review will also be to make sure we have that capacity to deal with the larger scale issues. The advantage we have during the evening is the roads are far quieter, so we can get appliances to places quicker than we can during the day when the roads are busier. So that's part of the things we'll look at. But we will look at all these elements to make sure we have enough of a resilience there to protect the communities as we need to. part of this transformation we are aiming to have is a planned and safe transformation, and some of these elements will be included in that.
If there's no other comments or questions, can we agree to remit the finalisation of our response to the Director, just in consultation with myself and the Vice Convener, to get the final text in by Friday? Okay, thank you very much for that. Which takes us on to paper 7, which updates the committee on progress on actions contained within the Gypsy Traveller Strategy from 2013 to 2018, ahead of the new Gypsy Traveller Strategy coming for this committee in August. Thanks very much, gentlemen. The aims of the strategy were to develop a more coordinated approach to the delivery of services and accommodation for Gypsy travellers in Perth and Kinross, to deliver joined-up services to meet their needs and ensure that we're meeting our equalities legal requirements. The report highlights specific action the Council has taken to engage with members of the Gypsy Traveller community, including funding of the work of the Minority Ethnic Carers of People project and the welcome continuation of funding for that project for a further 3 years at the budget meeting in February. Members of the Gypsy Traveller community have recently been actively involved in the delivery of Show Racism the Red Card events and with out-of-sight workshops, which focuses specifically on racism towards the Gypsy, Roma and travellers, being run in primary schools during each year of the strategy. For the most recent academic year, 4 primary schools and 350 primary school pupils benefited from the training. The annual get-together has evolved into a wellbeing Mila, including a broader membership and participants from all communities, and attendance growing to 250 people at the last Mila in October. The funding of the Ethnic Minority Law Centre has also been confirmed for a further 3 years, with the Law Centre's services and advice available to the Gypsy Traveller community. And the award-winning Bridging the Gap project is also working with our Gypsy Traveller communities. As part of the First World War centenary commemorations, Heritage Lottery funding was successfully secured to produce an exhibition based on local research and real-life experiences, which focused on the contribution, service and sacrifice made by members of the Gypsy Traveller community, highlighting the impact the war had on their traditional way of life and their families at home. The project also explored the experiences of soldiers returning from the war to Perthshire who were suffering from shell shock. Paragraph 2.2 of the report identified one action of the previous strategy which did not progress, which was the identification of a preferred stopover or temporary site. Under the previous council, the Housing and Health Committee decided not to pursue any of the potential sites identified. Moving forward, work on the new Gypsy Traveller strategy will continue over the summer and will be brought back to the committee in August. Can I ask if there's any questions on the report? Councillor McEwen.
Just a quick question. In regard identifying new sites, have we ever used compulsory purchase as a means to get a site that's suitable?
I'm not aware of compulsory purchase being used to acquire any site. Certainly I know for a long time there was an audit carried out of all council-owned sites from all services. And eventually that list was distilled down to several options that were brought before the previous Housing Health Committee. As I mentioned, I think in fairness, it has to be said that a lot of those sites would have been considered either subprime or at best marginal, and the committee at that stage decided not to proceed to public consultation on any of those. I was a lone voice in suggesting that 2 of those sites should potentially be taken forward, but that didn't get the backing, I think, of the committee. Since that time, I think there has been a shift of emphasis and policy nationally towards a greater focus on the policy of managed stopping, and I think that's probably what's going to inform the strategy moving forward. But I don't know whether Barbara or anyone else can comment on the use of compulsory purchase. Tom?
Thank you for the question and thank you for your comments, Convener. The Convener has, sort of distilled a very long history in terms of, sort of the examination of potential further sites across Perth and Kinross. And, sort of at no point was I aware of any suggestion of compulsory purchase orders for any sites within here. I am not sure what the national position on that, though, is, Councillor McKeown.
Thank you, Convener. Just in reference to paragraph 2.1.9, around the Scottish Government's guidance on minimum site standards and site tenants' co-responsibilities, etc., I'm wondering if the guidance sets out a maximum repair response time within that guidelines, because I've got personal experience of being councillor for the Bobbin Mill site and dealing with a high number of issues there relating in particular to the timeline for repair responses. So I'm just wondering if there is minimum timeline guidance within that national government guidance.
I'll see if we can get a response from either David McPhee or Claire Mailer regarding that point. The feedback that I'd had was that certainly in physical terms, the sites in Perth and Kinross exceeded the standards that were specified, but I don't know about response time, so can you reply to that?
Yeah, in terms of response times for our sites, they're exactly the same as they are for our mainstream tenants, so they fall within that. So I'm not aware of any specific issues at Bobbin Mill, but I can take those up with you separately if you would like to after the meeting.
Do you want supplementary, Councillor McDade?
No, I mean, there is a number of ongoing issues. I'll speak to them later. Thank you.
Councillor Ahern.
Yes, thanks very much. I'd like to refer back to the question that's already been asked, but in a different way, which was about the two sites. And I looked back at the previous paper and I realised it's still private, so I'm not going to go into the results of the survey that was carried out there. But can I get assurances that we're not going to be re-looking back at the two sites that came out as favourite?
Well, I mean, if the committee was minded that it wanted to revisit those, then that would be a decision of this committee, Chris. I kind of took from previous experience that there wasn't a willingness to do that. As I said, I think the policy and circumstances have changed. I think the aspect of those sites has also changed. One of the three potential sites, there were two in North Muirton and one at Friarton. I think the Friarton one was, to be honest, so subprime as not to be practical to proceed with. One of the Muirton sites, which I think was the five-a-side football pitch, which had been used previously by the Gypsy Travellers community, it was subject to a further development of the Genefield Swifts facilities, and there's been an expansion and greater take-up of the land at the Food and Drink Park in Verramond, which I think would preclude the use of that site in the future. I think there's also been the situation and experience that Dundee City Council have had of creating a temporary or transit site which people won't actually use. So, I think it's got to, if we were to bring a site option forward at a future date, it would have to be done with a consultation with the Gypsy Traveller communities as to what might be available. Linked to the Crosstail Link Road, I had spoken to our planners to see if, through the compulsory purchase process associated with that and the land take, and whether there would be any potential sites available through that process. The response that I got was that would be difficult, and it was unlikely that landowners would yield to CPO fine for the road, but not for the potential transit sites. And that was before we'd even got round to speaking to people as to whether there would be a suitable location you know, a lot of these sites are used historically, and a lot of the informal sites have been used historically as well. So, Barbara, yeah.
And just to carry on from that, as officers, we have no political direction at the moment to be looking for any other site. The decision was very clear of the committee that, you know, sort of to use a more limited amount of funding to do, you know, sort of upgrade work, you know, sort of the number of sites that we already have. And paragraph 2.2 identifies what we've done and we will be looking to do more work there, you know, sort of over the course of this financial year as well.
Are there any other comments or questions, or can we agree the recommendations of the report? Agreed. Thank you very much. Paper 8 is the Housing and Adult Social Care Complaints and Customer Feedback Report. The report covers the period from the 1st of April 2017 to the end of March this year. It advises members of the introduction of a new way of handling complaints regarding social work services, bringing social work complaints procedures more in line with the procedures used across the rest of the Council, which uses a two-stage resolution process, with stage 1 being frontline resolution and stage 2 being a more formal investigation into complex cases. Learning from complaints is vital to the delivery of high-quality services and service user satisfaction. Section 2 of the report covers the arrangements for the monitoring of complaint levels and scrutiny of issues and themes arising, and the sharing of those with management and implementation of improvement plans. Within social work, stage 1 complaints rose from 65 to 99. It's thought that part of that increase was accounted for by bringing the social work complaint system into line with the way that the rest of the Council operated previously. As you'll see from the report, it was an in-house complaints process, with stage 1 being frontline resolution, stage 2 being the investigation, and a further stage was stage 3 for the complaints resolution committee. That no longer exists. The 4 cases that went to the committee were historic cases that overran the new way of the new complaints procedure, which was after stage 2, any complaint thereafter is referred to the Public Services Ombudsman. So the awareness raising that we did with staff was particularly to ensure that any complaints to the Public Service Ombudsman were minimised, and we think that's a contributory factor to the rise in a number of complaints resolved at the earlier stages in that. And it's worthwhile noting even that the number of stage 2 complaints halved to 14. In non-social work services, the number of complaints remains almost static. In housing repairs, there were 237 complaints arising from around about 20,000 repairs resolved at stage 1, which was down by 30 from the previous year. Issues regarding complaints arising from the Council's external gas contractor were pursued with the company, and those related to timekeeping of appointments, cleanliness of work, and staff attitude, customer care issues. Monitoring continues with regular customer care meetings with the contractor. Finally, I would like to say that I do find the comments in section 3.3.1 and 3.4.1 regarding failure to respond timorously to phone calls and letters as disappointing as these were raised, and echo comments made in the report a year ago. So certainly I'll be putting additional focus onto that to see that improves for the future. But I'd also be grateful as we've now moved into a new service to have the comments as to how the director views the standards and the responses that the service will provide moving forward. So before opening to questions, I'll ask Barbara to respond to that.
Thank you, Convener, for those comments. I'd like to start off by maybe putting it into a little bit of context, our locality teams across the course of the reporting year took 70,000 calls. And our repair service dealt with 29,000 repairs. So in terms of the front line resolution complaints, 1.1% is quite a small number. In terms of stage 2, that translated into 0.08% of complaints compared to the number of repairs that we undertook as well. Having said that, we're day 46 of the new Housing and Environment Service, and while there is an awful lot still to do in terms of actually creating that new service, one of the things that we have already looked at is merging the best processes and the best practice across a number of areas from the old Environment Service and the old Housing and Community Safety Service as well. And one of the things we have looked at is complaints and how we monitor complaints, both at a management, a divisional management team level, and and Claire and Michelle and the rest of the management team there do look at this on a monthly basis. And we've already looked at across the whole of the new service management team about how we have been doing that across both services. It's quite clear, that, the 71% is disappointing, even within that context of, of the number of that. But there have already been a number of improvements across repairs in terms of, training for call centre staff, much more robust monitoring arrangements within, the monthly complaints scrutiny group that the report refers to and Councillor Barrett referred to as well. Reporting to both the housing management team and senior management team as well, and then looking at what the improvement actions are and how we implement them and whether we are actually implementing them as well. Currently, within the Environment Service, the old Environment Service, then, we had an 85% target for, dealing with complaints within the 20 days. On the whole, we achieved that and more than achieved that. So we'll be looking at the practice within, that service and housing and how we put those, that good practice together. I think you may think that 85% is not a great target. However, I think we need to be very mindful of, the resources that it does take, and the fact that we have seen a reduced resource in terms of staffing, to be able to deal with that. So it is a complete commitment to be able to look at that, and I hope that that provides a deal of reassurance to you, that we will take this forward and have already done so.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Ahern.
Thanks very much. I'd just like to pick up one of the comments on paragraph 3.3.1 with regards to the lack of clarity about the status of power of attorney documents. Scotland's operated 3 major templates for power of attorneys, be it a combined health or welfare. And very occasionally will you get power of attorneys that have additional paragraphs to it. I'm just wondering why we're suddenly now looking at providing training with regards to the status of power of attorneys, or what the issue was with regards to the status of power of attorneys?
Okay. I suspect that that relates to social work complaints, and I don't see Joy Mulglothing there. Apologise for that, Councillor Ahern. Can we get back to you with a response on that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I'm curious about the complaints gathering from the social work services. Are these for the services provided directly by the council, or can they also be for services provided through third-party partners?
I don't know off the top of my head, so Barbara, can you respond to that?
My understanding, and I'm just looking for somebody to nod, that it is just about council-led services. But again, this is, this is a combined report, and technically, it will go to, the relevant other committee to be able to deal with the social work elements of this. Our responsibility here is about the housing complaints here, but we can pick those issues up.
But the report includes social work complaints, so I don't think you can really say this is only about housing.
I'm not saying that.
And my supplementary comment, therefore, is that as increasingly a number of our services are being delivered by third-party partners, how can we really be assured that the social care element of our services are being properly delivered and complaints are being properly monitored and handled in an equitable way across all of our population?
Okay, I think the point I would like to make regarding the report, including social work statistics, and I think it's perfectly valid to ask questions regarding that and the report in front of us. All I would say is it also goes to the Scrutiny Committee. This would be the last report that comes forward with social work statistics to a council, or social work complaint statistics to a council committee. In future, it would be going to the integrated joint board for their scrutiny and for them to provide the reassurance regarding the services, be they externally commissioned or provided by the council. Do you want to add to that, Barbara?
Sorry, I think that Claire possibly has a little bit more information.
I mean, certainly I would agree with sort of Councillor Barrett and Barbara's comments there. In terms of the complaints, absolutely in terms of third sector providers, what the report will include is any complaints made to the council about third sector providers, but if there's been any complaints made directly within that service, that will not be included within the report. But I could get more detail on those to you via Joy, our complaints officer.
Councillor Coates.
Under paragraph 3.4.1, I would just like a bit of clarity on what exactly how to fix online video will entail and who exactly will it be aimed at.
Right. Well, the how to fix online videos, the clue is in the description, Harry. They are online videos on the council website that give residents helpful tips about how they can deal with issues such as mould, for example, and other things. I've watched a few of them, but the mould one is the only one that springs to mind. Oh well. The director's fascination is obviously for unblocking toilets, but perhaps Claire can tell us a bit more about the videos. But they're, I think, a series of short, easy to understand self-help videos for tenants, and additionally for anybody else who encountered that problem and Googled for an answer.
Yeah, I think Councillor Barrett has probably covered that more than comprehensively in terms of the videos. And yes, my favourite one is the how to unblock a toilet with a mop and a black bin bag. But these, the online videos, just some more detail on that. The online videos were in response to our Housing Repairs Transformation Programme. Housing repairs, as Barbara's described, is a very high volume activity, and therefore that's one of the areas where we do receive, a higher number of complaints. So through our Housing Repairs Transformation Programme, we've been really focusing on all of the areas that our tenants have fed back to us, such as improved complaints reporting, more detailed information, the right diagnosis by our repairs call centre staff at the point that they phone in for a repair. And as part of that, as Councillor Barrett's explained, our tenants have actually supported us in preparing the videos. And there's a wide number of videos such as how to unblock a toilet, how to change a light bulb, how to treat dampness and mould and condensation. In our recent tenant satisfaction survey, we drilled down a wee bit more detail about housing repairs, and it's hot off the press because we've just received the tenant satisfaction survey. 90% of our tenants who've used the videos have found them to be useful. And I think what I would also say is the tenant satisfaction survey results that we've just received on Friday, which sit within the context of our service delivery, are showing some excellent results across all areas of the service delivery. So we consider that in context with our complaints. So I think that's important to know as well.
And I think the relevance of that comment is with regard to the slight decline in tenant satisfaction that's reported in the report from last year compared to the year before. The survey of over 1,000 tenants is now showing satisfaction levels in around the 95% and 95% plus levels. So that'll be good news that we can report in future to the committee. Are there any other comments or questions? Oh, Councillor Pover and then Councillor Gray.
Thank you very much, Convener. It was just a quick question. I was just curious as to know why in complaints there was a delay in handling complaints for social work in line with to be brought in line with other departments in Perth Kinross. I'm just wondering why initially it was dealt with differently.
I think historically there was a separate social work complaints process, but Barbara, can you?
Yes, I mean, legislatively there was a separate complaints process for social work, and that has just been pulled into line, nationally, I believe, so we used to take complaints in a separate way. They had different timescales, so that part of the training to bring it more into line with the corporate process now.
That's lovely, thank you.
Yeah, the table, paragraph 4. Customer satisfaction, the table there. I find it interesting. Curiously, the highest percentage of satisfaction is with the percentage of tenants who think the rent of a property represents good value for money, whereas it's a very modest rise, right enough, but the other 3 tables relative to housing tenants, a significant kind of drop. It would seem that, cheaper or more affordable houses or better value comes at a price. But where do our charges of rent relate to other regions throughout Scotland?
I think our rents are the 7th or 8th lowest in Scotland, as part of the rent restructuring project that the council undertook in its last council term. There was an affordability model built into that, which Claire can tell you more about. I think there's also an issue with regard to Table 4 that we're not exactly comparing like for like each year, depending on how the statistics have been gathered. In some years you have a full tenant survey. In other years you're going by the feedback that is returned by tenants at various tenant engagement events, but Claire can probably tell you more about that. So.
Okay, yeah, in terms of our rent levels, Councillor Barrett's right, we're actually sitting as the 9th lowest rent nationally for social landlords. And I'm not sure if you were at an elected member session, but we've done a lot of work in terms of the affordability models, and so we compare very favourably locally as well in terms of our rent levels. So our assessment is that our rent levels are affordable for residents and tenants within Perth and Kinross. In answer to the other question in terms of customer satisfaction levels, as Councillor Barrett's pointed out, when this report was compiled, that was based on our previous survey. We undertake one big full survey of all of our tenants around a whole range of indicators and tenant satisfaction levels every 2 to 3 years. So that information is historic information. We have just, as I said, hot off the press, received our tenant satisfaction survey on Friday. And I would say, in comparison to the first indicator there, that has increased from 82.9% to just under 95%. How good do you feel your landlord is at keeping you informed at decisions? That's sitting just under 97%. How satisfied are you in terms of the decision making and your opportunities to participate? 98.7%, and so on. So as Councillor, but I won't go on and on, but we are sitting in the very high 90s. Michelle's assessment compared to the national results last year, we're the top of many local authority landlords in many of these indicators. We've got a wealth of information. We really drilled down in terms of repairs, and we've got some very good information in terms of what our tenants feel of a repairs survey, and that links back to this complaints report so that we really know where the hot points are and where we do need to improve. So the two things go hand in hand.
Is it fair to say that that's a rather misleading table then?
That was based on the satisfaction levels sort of previously, and the 17-18 ones were a temperature check survey that we took during 2017. The survey that we've recently undertaken is of a 14%, so over 1,000 tenants have responded to that recent survey, so it's a good sample size, over 14%. So we'll be updating, obviously, sort of future information.
I think it's fair to say that it was the best information we had at the time, Tom. But if we hark back to the previous council meeting, you can rest assured that we'll be letting the Scottish Housing Regulator know of the new information ASAP, and we'll look forward to them emblazoning that on the land report. Are there any other comments or questions? No. Can we agree the recommendations of the report? Thank you. And thank you very much for your time and the scrutiny that you've provided today. Thank you.